So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, namaskar, pranam, namaste, adab, sat sri akal, vanakkam. Welcome again to the live chat on Sunday. And today we have a very, very important subject that is marriage. Marriages are made in heaven and destroyed on earth. Marriage is a very, very important institution and a very, very important part of our life. And I think and our entire life depends on marriage, how good, bad, ugly, happy, unhappy, turbulent, smooth it is. So, not just our lives, but the lives of people around us, the lives of our kids, the life, our workplaces, everything gets affected by how the marriages are. So, as all relationships are important, but the relationship with our spouses is the most important, has the maximum impact on your own microcosm. So we'll talk about marriage, and it, as I said, it's a very, very important part of our life. And we have two very, very important guests on our show. Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjay and Purnima, for agreeing to come on the show. Dr. Sanjay Chug, he's one of my, idols. I almost hero worship him, and I have known him even before I entered medical college. Many of you may not know, he was a brilliant quiz master. He was brilliant conducting and taking part in jams, just a minute. When he was, on the shows, he was really amazing. And I was really in awe of him. I used to really admire him. And then, of course, when I entered medical college at his MAMC, I got to know that he was also in the same college. So he was my senior. He's one of the most brilliant doctors I have seen. He did his medicine from Maulana Azad Medical College. That is my alma mater also. After that, he went to BHU, Banaras Hindi University, to pursue his MD degree in psychiatry. He's a senior psychiatrist, a very, very well-known psychiatrist in Delhi, almost a celebrity psychiatrist in Delhi. He, besides the routine psychiatry, he's also specializing in addiction medicine, non-invasive brain stimulation. He also deals with the conditions like erectile dysfunction and other psychological disorders. And he's supported by a very good team. Another important member of his team is Purnima Sahai, who's a senior psychologist. She's a senior counseling psychologist with more than 18 years of experience to her. She deals with stress, anxiety, depression, marital problems, and addiction. He's a trainer for anger management, stress management, team building, enhancing communication, suicide prevention, and increasing personal effectiveness. So, Dr. Sanjay Chok, Purnima Sahai, thank you very much and welcome on the show.
Thank you, Sanjay.
So let me start with a very an interesting story, first of all, now. And that is two young people. They meet each other in college. They become friends. And very, very slowly, over the period of years, this friendship develops into something more strong, more emotional bond. They fall in love with each other. With some reluctance, she finally agrees to him and she says yes to him. They go further in their studies. And with some reluctance, the parents agree to their propositions and they finally get married. They continue the studies, they settle down in their life, and they have a child. They keep struggling in their career, keep settling down the family, they have a proper household, they put things together, they put their life together, they take care of their child grows up. They feel that everything is on course now, there's time for a second child, so they go for a second child. Second child comes up, and starts growing, things are going fine, life is going fine, everything is smooth and happy, nothing wrong with the life. But suddenly, they hit a big patch of turbulence. There is turbulence. Their boat starts to shake, the boat starts to rock, there are waves and there is storm. It becomes very, very stormy. And it's a very, very rough patch they face. The boat is rocking, the boat is shaky, it is stormy, it's raining, it is thundering, it is lightning, and it is very, very uncertain whether the boat will survive or boat will not survive. There comes a moment when boat is almost, about to capsize. But then things become better. They work hard on the boat, they pull the mast, down, they pull the sail down, they hold on to the ropes, they put in their best effort to stabilize the rope to go through the storm. And with some help, the storm settles down, things become better, and boat starts sailing smooth again. foot of the sail again, and the boat is again flowing past. This is a story of a typical couple, a typical marriage, and you will find this example all around you. That people fall in love, they get married, things are fine, they have kids, family settle down, but then every marriage hits a rough patch. I haven't, in my experience around me, come across any couple, any marriage whose life or whose marriage did not hit a rough patch, or who did not have any turbulence, who did not have any problems. Everybody goes through problems, and surprisingly, same set of problems. And surprisingly, without any cause, without any rhyme and reason. That is the majority of the cases. Of course, in a small number of cases, there is a reason for it. There's a valid reason for it. There are problems related to marriage. But I'm saying that in vast majority, there are no reasons. Everything is going fine, but suddenly they hit a rough patch and things go into bad shape. What is the outcome of that? That, of course, varies from case to case. No? But marriage is institution in a way, it's a relationship in a way that where things are bound to go wrong. Any two people living together constantly under the same roof will end up in trouble, will have fights, will have differences, will have frictions, Haven't you seen siblings fighting with each other day in, day out? Same roof, same, everything is the same, everything is fine, but they still fight, So do marriages, And when things go wrong, it really causes a lot of upset for the couple, for the kids, for the family, for the work environment, for everything around us. So that's why this topic becomes exceedingly important to deal with. So we have a lot of questions, around the marriage. And today we need to address those questions, with the help of these two experts. And let me just quickly run through these questions, and we'll take it one by one afterwards. So what is marriage? Our marriage is actually made in heaven. What is an ideal marriage? How to choose a life partner? Love versus arranged. Is compatibility overhyped? Do we look for similarities in our partner, or do we look for differences in our partner? What role do families play? Marriages versus live-in relationship. Is the institution of marriage flawed? The honeymoon years, and what can go wrong in those early phases? What happens at the 7th year? Why do we start having pruritus ani? Some people may understand this term, others may not. But 7th year age, So why do marriages get into trouble years after, when everything seems to be going fine? Children, are they the commonest complications of marriage, or are they really binding forces of between two people? Pati, Patni, or phone? There's no woe anymore, there's phone nowadays. Why do wives seek attention and husbands seek space? And are men actually from Mars and women from Venus? Our questions really continue further. Are we designed to be mono or polygamous or androus? Are natural laws and social laws at war with each other? What are the early signs of trouble? What to do when you hit turbulence? Is open communication overrated? What role does silent acceptance adaptation play? When to call it quits? How is life on the other side, that is after quitting? Should one commit the same mistake twice? Is happily lived ever after a mirage? And the final take-home message from the speaker. So these are the questions that we will be addressing in today's conversation. So once again, thank you, Dr. Sanjay. Thank you, Purnima. And I'll start with my very first question, which may sound very, very odd. That what is marriage? Let us start with the very basic. Sanjay, please.
What is marriage? Marriage is the name given to a relationship where two people commit to stay with each other for the rest of their lives. Short and sweet. It's a relationship. It's a relationship where both partners expect certain norms, certain conditions to be binding on the other person and on each other. And there is social sanctity, there is legal sanctity to this union, and this is what marriage is. But at the end of the day, it's a relationship like any other relationship, and needs a lot of nurturing, and it needs 25 questions to be answered, which we've just gone through. And by the end of this question, hopefully you'll have a better idea about what a marriage is and what it takes to make it work.
Is it copy for others also?
Sorry?
The voice is not very clear. It is a little interrupted.
Sanjay, I'm actually sitting at my farm. I've tried 2 different dongles, so I'm just on my phone.
Okay.
Selfing. So, do you want me to repeat this?
Come again, please.
Dr. Shuk, maybe you can try switching off your video or something for a moment.
Okay.
Try it. Yes, yeah.
Okay, let's try this.
Yeah,
Better.
yeah, better.
Better, yes, yeah.
Okay, very good.
So you do,
Purnima is a technology expert also.
Whatever.
so you do a lot of
Okay.
past-life regression therapy also. So this will be a good question for you, that what is that our marriages actually made in heaven, do you think?
No, I don't think so, but it sounds very fancy. It sounds fancy to talk in those terms. And one cannot take away the role of destiny in our lives. And for the want of anything better, I would say that there is some place that someone has decided, okay, these two guys should be united in holy matrimony. But the practical side of my brain, which is a much larger side of my brain, says that a marriage is an institution built out of choice on planet Earth, on Mother Earth, where we stay, and we choose who we want to marry, or there are people who choose who we are going to marry.
Is it more of a business contract or a legal contract or an agreement kind of thing, or a partnership agreement?
No. I don't think it's a contractual arrangement at all. I mean, not when you get into it, it's definitely not a contractual arrangement. A small portion of marriages definitely end up being like a contract, but the larger percentage is a relationship where there is a lot of investment of time, of effort, of emotion that takes place over months and years. And so I would not say that it's a business arrangement at all. The legal agreement is there to provide legal sanctity and to provide it social sanctity.
Yes.
But in no way would I call it a business contract or a contractual arrangement.
Point which he emphasized, that it's a relationship where you have to work very, very hard for a very, very long time. Purnima, what do you say, that what is your idea of marriage now?
I largely agree with what Dr. Chud is saying, but yeah, I think it's also an arrangement of sorts, I feel, where people come together, two people come together to address certain needs, let's say. Those needs could be financial, those needs could be social, those needs could be romantic, emotional, they could be of all sorts. And I would say that in terms of, this question, whether it's some kind of a contract, I would say that maybe in the past it was still a little bit of a contract, or more of a contract in terms of, people needing each other more in terms of financial, social arrangements of security. But now I feel that the financial aspect is really reduced. I think now people are getting together more from a perspective of romantic, emotional, family needs, wanting to be together, wanting to live together, companionship. Those are bigger needs these days, because as we can see, women are also now financially a lot different from how they were in the past. So those kind of contracts, though still there, I feel have loosened up a bit.
So Sanjay, what according to you is the ideal marriage?
I don't think an ideal marriage exists. I mean, कभी किसी को मुकम्मल जहां नहीं मिलता, that same thing applies to a marriage. I mean, every relationship will have its strong points, its pluses, its highs. Both partners will have their strong points, their pluses, but at some point in time or the other, you have to accept the fact that there are going to be differences of opinion, differences of thought processes, differences in behavior patterns, which when they stay for a period for a certain length of time would lead to what we would call incompatibility.
Okay.
So the reason why I am emphasizing this is that there's nothing like an ideal marriage, is because I don't want people to have a romanticized version of a relationship, which could be ideal for a certain length of time, but there are going to be phases, like you said right in the beginning. There are going to be phases when it is going to be slightly short of ideal, maybe more than slightly short of ideal. And once you accept that, once you can anticipate that, once your expectations of the relationship are real and realistic, you are going to end up being much, much happier, instead of having very, very high and very unrealistic expectations of each other and of the relationship, which are never going to be fulfilled, which will only lead to a lot of heartburn and heartache and heartbreak.
So how to choose a life partner? Now, this is more from the point of view of our younger friends who are not yet married or who are thinking of getting married. or who are thinking of, maybe remarriage or something. So how to choose a life partner, Purnima?
I think, the
Okay.
choosing the
Now,
one.
like within, okay, sorry.
Oh,
Purnima, you
sorry,
go.
sorry. Yeah, thanks. So choosing the one, I think that itself is like the biggest complex that we've created for ourselves. And especially now in the age of the dating apps and the marriage portals and so on, there is what we would call a problem of plenty, or that's what a person thinks, that there are too many options and then there are too many criteria to be looked at. And so what that leads to is a whole deal of anxiety and a whole deal of confusion, because a person will never know who is the right person. And uh, and I think that's where, when we are working with people who are in this kind of a situation, what we guide them to do is to look at themselves. The yardstick lies within. The yardstick is not lying on the other side. It's not with the other person. You do not necessarily have to just look at the characteristics of the other person. You have to look at how you are in response to a certain person or a certain type of person whom you are interacting with. So one needs to see that, do I feel better? Do I feel like a better person? Do I feel that I can live my life with this kind of a person, and so on? That, I think, should be the gauging mechanism, rather than looking at who is Sundar and who is Sushil and those kind of things.
Sanjay, what do you say?
See, when we, Purnima said a little while back that, how people are getting into relationships, that is changing. I think that's very, very, very close of big cities. But in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, I think the earlier norms are still prevalent.
Give
And
sound.
Dr. Chuk,
Video off, please. Yeah, that'll be better. Yeah.
Okay. Is this better?
Better. Yes.
Okay. So as Purnima said a little while back, the nature of relationships of marriage is changing. But I would say that's applicable right now in the metros, in the big cities, in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, in the villages and all, the earlier norms are still prevalent. But if we look at these metros and the tier 1 cities and so on, what happens is that, you are in college, you meet someone, you start getting attracted to the other person. And, things are very, very hunky-dory for a certain length of time. Unfortunately, that is a phase of infatuation, where the brain is programmed only to look at the positives and to ignore the negatives. And now if I see only the white in a person and I don't see the darker shades, I'm going to be, I'll end up believing that there is nothing possibly wrong in the person, and so there would be nothing possibly wrong in the relationship that I would have with the person. The fact of the matter is that everyone and everything in this world is a shade of gray. During the phase of infatuation, you do not recognize those shades of gray, which catches you completely off guard when you finally get married to that person. But again, what happens here is that if you are not willing to accept the fact that, okay, there was a phase of infatuation where we were irresistibly drawn towards each other, but now that phase has ended and now we're entering a real life world, things are going to change. If that acceptance is not there, then you're always going to be caught unawares. Whereas if you can accept this, that, okay, these are the good things in this person, in this man, in this woman, so these good things are there and they are there to stay. Now, if there are some unforeseen grays, if there are some unforeseen negatives that come up, a few months down the road, a few years down the road, it's okay. They are going to be counterbalanced and far outweighed by the positives that I'm seeing in the person. So that's a good way to choose a life partner. But going this path of, having some guy suggest someone, I know this family, the son is brilliant or the girl is very beautiful and she's homely and she can cook very well and all, that tells you absolutely nothing about the person. Is just like flipping a coin and asking for heads. There's a 50% chance that you'll get heads. There's also a 50% chance you get tails. And if you're gambling in a casino, maybe the coin will just go and stand on one edge. We go back to what I said a few minutes back. Any relationship can be a wonderful relationship provided both people understand their responsibilities in the relationship. That a relationship will work only if both of you are committed towards making it work. You keep putting the onus on the other person, take the credit for the goods that happen, put the onus on the other person for all the shortcomings, that's a relationship that is never going to be a healthy or an adaptive kind of relationship.
So the next question, which obviously comes out of this, is that whether to go for a love marriage or arranged marriage, which is better, if at all, any one of them is better.
Purnima?
Again, I think it's such a 50-50. There are merits to both and demerits to, there can be demerits. See, in the Indian society, I feel that, we are all a very majorly family system oriented culture. And so here, the whole system of arranged marriage has been very successful, frankly. So as per data, we have no reason to really say that arranged marriage nahi karni chahiye. But yeah, I mean, so arranged marriage, like Dr. Chu was just saying, that there are certain parameters that one can look at, which are very regular things like कि family कैसी है, पैसा कितना है, लोग कैसे हैं, मारवाड़ी हैं, गुजराती हैं, पंजाबी हैं, and so on and so forth, just to try and match some kind of a cultural similarity. Once those characteristics have been taken care of, or once those aspects have been taken care of, I think it comes to eventually really boils down to how are the two people with each other. And I feel that it's a bigger gamble in an arranged marriage situation than in a love marriage situation a lot of times. Because in a love marriage situation, you know the person a little bit more. You spent more time, I'm assuming. You've done more things together and you are aware of the likes and dislikes of each other. So if we keep in mind the whole factor of the marriage being a work in progress and both of us being responsible equally and do our bit, then perhaps a love marriage can have a good role to play in terms of just the couple, whereas the arranged marriage takes care of the other aspects and gamble at the end of the day, both of them are really.
So what is the role of the families then? In both love marriage as well as arranged marriage?
See, I think if there are two teams playing a match, or let's say there are two individuals who are playing a badminton match, they are the main characters on the stage. There are a lot of spectators who are cheering good shots, who are booing the opponent, and so on. My take on this question is that families at best are and should remain spectators, while the stage is occupied by the two principal contestants or the two principal characters. The families should be spectators who are cheering both of them on and not necessarily booing the other side whenever that person fails to pick up a shot or hits a shot into the net, which a lot of families do not have that kind of awareness. They don't have that kind of insight, and they find that it is their bounden responsibility to pick up the negatives and to roundly criticize the person for doing what they feel should not have been done, or for not doing what they feel should have been done. But ideally, or under ideal circumstances, this is a role that families should play. If it's a love marriage, the role remains the same. If it's an arranged marriage, the role still remains the same. Purnima has seen enough and more, couples who've had problems in their marriages. I have seen enough and more couples. I mean, when people come and you ask them, was it an arranged marriage? So, they say, it was an arranged marriage. And then the wife comes separately and she says, thank God it's an arranged marriage. I have someone else to blame for the problems that I'm having with this person. Whereas if it had been a love marriage, again, I have heard this so many times. I would say maybe hundreds and thousands of times, where the person, the wife or the husband talking to me separately says, doc, we have no one to blame. I chose her myself, or she says I chose him myself. But the fact of the matter is, it's not a blame game. You need to recognize the fact that there are some shortcomings, some differences, some rifts, and there is no marriage, no relationship that has problems which cannot be solved. Families here can play a constructive role by supporting positive change, but we also see families playing a destructive role by condoning negative changes.
Do the family plays more negative role in love marriages and more positive role in arranged marriages?
Not necessarily, but I think at some subconscious level, the families feel that it was a love marriage, and in our society, which I think is fairly primitive in terms of acceptance of relationships of this kind or of love marriages and all, they by default, if the girl tells her parents, I like this guy and I want to get married to him, their first default response is, no, he cannot be good for you. Why can he not be good for you? Because कुंडली नहीं मिलाई गई या किसी पंडित ने नहीं suggest किया, किसी मौलवी ने नहीं suggest किया, which is a load of crap for me. If that is your default mode of reactivity, it is going to stay with you for the rest of your lives.
What's your view on Purnima? Family support?
See, families are very, very intertwined over here. And I agree with what Dr. Chugh is saying, that in love marriage situations, a lot of times family will, they will jhado their heart a little bit. They'll reduce their responsibility in helping the couple because they feel ki, it was your choice, it was your decision. So automatically their level of responsibility may also reduce. But also we find that, families are so intertwined that a lot of the problems that couples face are related to the family, especially where there is a joint family setup, which is still very, very common over here. We find that a lot of the fights that the couples are having are only about the family. So when we are working with couples, for instance, a lot of times we have to tell them that, Acha, theek hai, first of all, we're going to park the family on the side. Let us just talk about the two of you. What is it that is going on between the two of you? And invariably, even there, the mother-in-law will get dragged in, the father-in-law will get dragged in, or the siblings, somebody or the other. And so while we are working with a couple in the Indian setup, I think we also have to, by default, address the entire family because it's such an intertwined unit. And while family can play a slightly negative role if they decide to, step in a slightly adverse way, but also I find that at times in certain family setups, the families can play a very cushioning role. So if there's a certain degree of fine tuning that can happen between the various members and units in the family, there's brilliant coordination that can actually happen and it can become a very, very supportive thing, So which we do find, and in fact, a lot of couples that we've been working with have eventually gone on to creating that kind of coordination with, let's say, the in-laws unit and the kids and the whole thing combined.
Coming to the point of compatibility, do we actually look for similarities between the two people who get married, or do we look for differences which complement each other?
I don't think anybody goes out looking for differences, really, very honestly. I don't think somebody consciously says that I'm going to go and find somebody who's very, very different from me. I mean, I feel that we are wired to look for something which is similar. Now, I'm using the word similar consciously and not same, because same would become very boring, I would think. But we're looking for a common ground largely. I think we're all looking for a common ground, some kind of common interest. And in fact, research also shows that couples who have a greater success rate are the ones who have some kind of common ground between them, who obviously have a lot of, who have some amount of emotional connect and who have some common interests and they have lives of their own. So, so even as we set out to look for the one, I think we are looking for some kind of similarity in terms of a common ground. And apart from that, I wouldn't say differences, but yes, complementary features. So for instance, somebody who's very anxious may like to be with somebody who has a very calm presence and who knows how to pacify him and her, or so on and so on. Yes.
So some similarities, some differences should be there, But that is true between any two individuals. Every two individuals will have some similarities, some differences between them. So is compatibility really an overhyped thing?
See, compatibility. Dr. Chugh.
Sorry, Purnima, go.
No, Dr. Chugh, go ahead, please.
See, I don't think anything is overhyped really. If you get something which is very good, which is better than what other people have gotten in their lives, or which is better than what you have seen other people getting in their lives, then consider yourself lucky. But going back 2 minutes when Purnima was talking about similarities and differences, we look for similarities, but we should also accept differences. Where this combination is present, I would call that compatibility. And compatibility is a very, very desirable thing in a relationship. It could be, emotional compatibility, intellectual compatibility, sexual compatibility, financial compatibility. But to say that compatibility is overhyped is, I would not subscribe to that. So if a couple, both partners are intellectually very compatible, but sexually not very compatible, so big deal. One balances the other out. Emotionally, there is a lot of empathy from both sides. Intellectually, there is some incompatibility, so big deal. If the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, then that's a wonderful goal to aim for.
Great. That's a fantastic thought. So it is said that the first 2 years after marriage are very, very crucial. They are the honeymoon years. But what can go wrong in the first 2 years or the honeymoon years?
What can go wrong? I mean, I'm walking on the road, I can be hit by a car, I can be hit by a truck, I can be hit by a bus, or I can reach my destination safely. I mean, theoretically, anything can go wrong. But for most couples, things do not ever reach those proportions because people are sensible enough to recognize what they want, what is expected of them, what they are willing to invest, how much they're willing to invest. And people who see, it's like building a house, when you have open ground, plain ground, you first put one brick, then you put one brick on the left side, one on the right side, then you put another brick, which is brick number 4, brick number 5. The first layer gets ready, you make the second layer, third layer, fourth layer, then you have a wall, then you make more walls. Finally, at the end of 2 years, you have a full house which is standing. If the house did not collapse, that means you've done a good job. That means the foundation stone that you used was good, or the foundation that you laid was solid and sturdy and strong. I would say that exactly the same thing applies to a relationship like marriage. That if you take these 2 years as the time that is required to put the foundation stone, to lay the foundation, which should be strong and sturdy, and you need to construct a strong superstructure. The pillars have to be strong. The joy is in doing all of that, and it is that joy which you and I are calling the honeymoon period. In a lot of cases, the honeymoon period just goes on and on for a much longer time. But unfortunately, for a certain percentage of couples, the honeymoon period is a much shorter period.
Yeah, Purnima, your views on it?
I feel essentially, yeah, the honeymoon period is called so because generally the voltage is a little high. So everything seems a little brighter at that time. We're just getting to know each other and so on. And at that time, I think we're very consciously more focused on the nicer aspects of each other and more forgiving of the not so nice aspects. But I don't know. Again, I agree with Dr. Chugh when he says that it's not necessarily that the same duration will be the honeymoon period, because for a lot of people, it's much shorter. And in fact, a lot of people come to us when their initial 2 years of the marriage have been the biggest struggle. And a lot of times when people come to us at a much later point also, when we ask them what is the time that the conflicts began, they would talk about the first 2 years, where either of them felt completely unsupported, because that's also the time when they're really figuring out how to be in this new relationship. And so what are the expectations from each other? What is my role? What do I expect from the other one? And so on. So there's a lot of fine tuning, and thereby a lot of times, a lot of friction also happening during that time. But honeymoon period would be the brighter phase, which could be variable again.
Sanjay, as you said that it's the foundation which you're laying in the first 2 years or in the honeymoon period. Now, what are the things that the people concerned and the family should take care of in that period?
No, can you repeat that, Sanjay?
You said that the foundation is being laid in the early part of marriage, that the first 2 years or the honeymoon years, and which decides how good the building would be. So what are the things that one should take care of, the families, the couple themselves, in the first initial part of the marriage life?
Okay, if we look at basic human emotions, the most basic human emotions, or most basic human emotions are happiness and unhappiness. And both arise out of a very simple equation between two variables. One is called expectations, the other is called fulfillment of expectation. You can have any expectation that you want. If that expectation is fulfilled, you will always be happy. Similarly, you can have any expectation that you want. If it is not fulfilled, you will always be unhappy. And as we have seen, I'm going to turn 60 soon. I have seen in the last 60 years of my life that no matter what you do, in a lot of cases, the fulfillment of my expectations was not in my hands. My expectations, they became derailed or they got derailed because of some unforeseen, unpredictable variables and so on. And so, since the fulfillment is not in our hands, and the only thing that is in our hands is expectations, the first point which I would make is that your expectations of each other, I mean, the two partners, or where the families are concerned, the family's expectations of the son and the daughter-in-law, or the daughter and the son-in-law should be realistic. And more importantly, you should have an innate and inherent ability to be flexible automatically with your expectations. Maybe you have higher expectations. The moment you find that this expectation is not being fulfilled, instead of being anal about it, instead of getting stuck with that expectation, you should have this immediate ability to lower the expectation that you have. Because if the higher expectation is not getting fulfilled, maybe if you have a lower expectation, that will get fulfilled. And that applies to both partners in the relationship, and it applies to the families who are a part of this marital bond.
What do you say?
I'm sorry, Sanjay, not clear. Are you asking me?
Yeah, what do you say?
About the foundation, laying the foundation
Yes.
of a relationship? Yes, I think we need to keep our eyes, ears, everything very open at that time. One of the key words that I would use for the laying of the foundation is being very, very open. So, because we need to get in with the assumption that I don't really know everything about my partner, let's say, or about this institution that I'm stepping into. And so if we enter with this expectation that I'm just going to learn a lot more, we can then automatically tune ourselves to it much better. And like Dr. Chugh is saying, the management of the expectations becomes a very, very relevant aspect there. And as we work with the couples, one of the things that we see, Sanjay, is that working with couples or making or predicting a success out of this relationship has much less to do with conflict resolution or conflict management. It has a lot more to do with the positive experiences that two people can share amongst themselves. So also, I think one of the primary things that one needs to focus on during the foundation stage is to create as many positive experiences, even in terms of, not just in terms of traveling and seeing things and those kind of experiences, but amongst ourselves, between ourselves, in terms of the emotional connect and so on, and the shared meaning that both of us can perhaps together evolve, which is also a long-term thing. But primarily, if we can build a lot of positive in the initial phase, then the chances of a success are much, much higher.
Sanjay, would you advise the newly married couples to actually sit down and set expectations and set some ground rules of engagement, or maybe make a blueprint for their times to come, or say a layout for the building they want to create?
And yeah, I can say it. I know it would be a very desirable thing. I also know that if we can actually set up a movement which promotes premarital counseling, it would do wonders in altering the quality of relationships that people finally end up creating or developing for themselves. But practically speaking, I don't see it happening. Because when you are 25, 26, 27, you're about to get married, the last thing that you want to do is to sit down like an architect and say, okay, this pillar goes here and this pillar goes here, and this is the amount of cement we will use and this is the amount of sand we will use. It's not going to happen. So the practical advice that I would give to people would be, and there is some advice which I think I'll give towards the end of today's session. The practical advice that I would give to people would be that the moment you see that something is going wrong, don't withdraw into a shell. You must have channels of communication open with your partner to convey to the partner what you think is going wrong.
Okay, good. So the initial period of marriage is done, honeymoon is over, time is passing, 7 years have passed, and people start to itch. what happens at the seventh year? Why do people get restless?
Purnima?
What happens at the seventh year? Why do people get restless? No, why do marriages get into trouble years after when everything seems to be going right? You know?
Purnima?
I think people largely become very complacent because, as Dr. Chugh was saying a few minutes ago, the expectation that we want to start this relationship with is that this is going to be a work in progress. And over a period of time, yes, initial phase, we are all very gung-ho about it. We work towards our relationship. And after a point in time, we get very caught up with bache and kaam and parents and responsibilities and bills and taxes and all those things. And it becomes very, maybe for the lack of a better word, monotonous. And we somewhere forget that this has to be a work in progress. And because the interest in the marriage, the interest in the couple has to be kept alive. One starts to perhaps take it for granted. Also, another thing that comes in the picture is that conflicts are not really happening, or conflicts are not happening in a constructive way. So perhaps problems that we have with each other are not really being addressed. And over a period of time, we decide ki chalo chodo side pe karo, let me focus on my music, let me focus on my games, let me focus on my work, let me focus on my friends, because I'm getting some degree of happiness from there. And we leave this one aspect behind, which has been nagging us within the relationship. When that happens, obviously things become, they begin to rot. And hence the 7-year itch, or it can be even a later year itch. There are people who would have relationships with outside of the marriage after, let's say, 20 years of their marriage and so on. So I'm not sure where the 7-year came from, but yeah, it can happen anytime once we become a little complacent, I feel.
The cliched thing, 7th year.
Yeah.
But you know, it's also seen that you said conflict, but there are people who don't have any conflict. Things are very smooth. Everything is settled. Everything is going fine. There's no real problem in their life. But again, things go wrong after some time. Or people don't think there's something.
Let me step in. Let me step in, Sanjay. There is no such thing as a relationship if there are no fights. If there are no fights, there is something seriously wrong in your relationship. Marriages need fights. Fights are healthy. Fights are normal and natural. It's only when they are unattended, unaddressed, and they turn ugly because of certain reasons that there's a problem. But day-to-day fights and arguments and all these things are really part of the package. I mean, think about it yourself. If you're not happy with a certain thing, why will you not say it? Why will you not get irritated by something? And why will you not express it? You express it and there'll be a fight, right? And then one can learn how to resolve it and get on. So people who are saying that there is no conflict and everything is very smooth and so on, they perhaps need to step back, reflect upon themselves and see, why is it that I'm not fighting? The marriage will not be alive if there are no fights.
Sanjay, what do you say?
I would see, I personally detest the concept of fights. So if Purnima were to replace the word fights with disagreements, I would endorse it 200%. That there is no relationship between any two people, forget husband and wife, even between siblings, friends, parents, children, colleagues, senior, junior, disagreements are always there. But do we always fight because there are disagreements? No. So the concept of fighting is something which is personally abhorrent for me. And when I see fights happening in relationships, that I actually fail to see the logic of fights. Because, for me, a fight is an aggressive manifestation of the discontent that you are facing within that relationship. But disagreements, yes, they are always going to be there. They are, I would say, they are inevitable. There's no way in which we can get away from disagreements within a relationship. And people who recognize this and who are willing to tackle the disagreements, they would probably get this pruritus NI at a much later stage, maybe like Purnima said, 20 years down the road, and not at the 7th year.
So I'll make a statement, and I'll like to have your response now. That in our life, we are all, so much used to overcoming challenges and troubles, that when there is no challenges, no trouble left, we feel restless and we start creating challenges for ourselves. We seek adventure, we seek trouble, we seek challenges, We either seek challenges outside or we seek challenges within the family, at home, Some people actually start climbing mountains, or going adventure sport to seek those challenges, Do you think that this sort of a challenge is required even in a relationship for it to be really viable and sustainable?
Sanjay, I don't think it is a challenge which is being sought here. There are some people, when we talk about a human being's personality, there are various traits that go towards making that person's personality. So one person could.
We lost the sound.
Yeah.
I think he lost the connection. So Purnima, why don't you give your views when he comes back?
Okay. So challenge, Sanjay, we look at, when we study about what draws people to each other, for instance, because here essentially what we're talking about is that over a period of time, people just cease to feel excited about each other. And there's no joy or excitement in the marriage and so on. And perhaps even the erotic connection goes down and so on. So, as human beings, I think we look at conflicting things. On one hand, from the partner, we require things like stability, security, comfort, reliability, dependability, all those, home-like factors. And on the other hand, we are looking at things like excitement, adventure, novelty, and fun, and surprise me. Whereas on the other hand, we want certainty and so on. So, as human beings, I think we are also a little conflicted, but the feeling drawn to somebody aspect essentially stems from the part of us that seeks a little bit of adventure, the part of it that seeks a little bit of novelty and excitement and so on. And it's quite a contradiction that lies within, I think, each relationship of this kind, because on one hand, we set out setting up a home with somebody where we want the former aspects, the stability, security, and after a point of time, jab wo bahut sara ho gaya hota hai, then we start feeling bored, that there's no excitement, there's no adventure. So I think what is required is, in a certain way, to answer your question, my answer would be yes, we require a certain amount of challenge, but I wouldn't say that challenge in terms of a challenge per se. I wouldn't call it a challenge as such. I would say we need to be mindful of both these needs of ours, both these desires, let's say, that we want stability and we want a little bit of excitement or adventure. And so if we can create that on our own a little bit within the setup of our marriage, of our family, then it becomes far more balanced. Then that itch doesn't really happen so much. The itch, okay, going back to that, the itch may also happen because we've neglected this aspect of ours, the need for adventure and novelty and all of that. If we let that be, then automatically, you want to look outside.
But don't you think that understanding the fact that there's always a need for adventure thrill is important, and also to seek that adventure thrill in a very, very healthy way. Like I said, people take to adventure sports. People start climbing mountains. People start doing adventure sport. They start doing bungee jumping and skydiving and whatnot. So if we know that, okay, fine, there will come a stage where there'll be no thrill left. There'll be a lot of stability.
Yes.
There'll be a lot of predictability. There'll be a lot of support, but there'll not be any thrill or excitement, and we may seek that. And we should seek it in a very, very healthy way, in ways and means which are acceptable and actually productive.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that, Sanjay, because if you're mindful of these two needs of ours, we'll perhaps begin and continue to address them in a much more healthy manner on a very day-to-day basis. For instance, in a couple's life, the usual is the week is monotonous, so to say, the routine. Okay, routine is nice. We all enjoy the routine actually. But if we only remain in the routine, then boredom seeps in. So we want to throw in elements, which is why I think people socialize, people take up hobbies and activities. And, you know, so if on the weekend we can both decide to go out uh, for a run together, for cycling together, for some other activity that we find interesting for ourselves, and even individually, like I said, because a marriage is not just about how to make it work with you, but it's a lot about how to have a life of my own also while having you around.
So that, of course, comes to a very important question of that, why do wives seek attention and women, husbands seek space? And the so-called pati, patni and phone. Phone would represent, say life outside, individual. There's a common life, there's an individual lives. No. What is the balance one should achieve, and whether these are important, or should they always be together and common life only,
Not at all. Common life will be suffocating, no? If it's only common life, if it's only just you and me together all the time and just you and me and all of that, anybody will feel stifled. So space, I think, yes, commonly we hear that men require more space and women require more attention, but I feel everyone requires space, even women. It's just perhaps that one notices the other aspect a little more. And women are emotional beings. Women have a need to communicate, women have a need to connect, and it's a very simple thing. In fact, with a lot of my clients, couples that I'm working with, one of the things that we talk about is, because it's a very common complaint that, I'm not getting time, I'm not getting attention, we need to talk about even household stuff. Why can't you take out that time? And then there are major blowouts that happen because of that. And so when we are working with couples, it's a lot of skill building that we're actually doing. So I tell my clients that, actually it is very easy to diffuse this thing, and you have to learn what a diffuser is. So for instance, in this situation, a very simple diffuser would be if you could just sit and take out a certain amount of time, sit with your spouse and say, अच्छा ठीक है बताओ क्या चल रहा है या क्या बारे में बात करनी है, or what's happening with you, and so on. You just listen, you just attend, you just be there and without your phone at that time. And that is all that it literally takes to help the person calm down completely. So yes, being emotional beings, women may require a little more of attention. And attention, I would say, more in terms of just this communication and being heard and being understood and being able to share what they have in their minds, and also to have the partner share what's going on with him. And men require more space because perhaps they feel that women need too much attention. So it becomes like an oppositional thing. But yeah, but coming to the phone now, this is like the biggest pandemic that we're actually facing today, the phone. And it's all across. It's not just in couples, it's all across. Sanjay, today I have a client who actually I have 3-4 clients that I'm working with जिनके बच्चे सब छोटे छोटे हैं. One is 9-year-old, one is 13, there's one who's somebody in teens, somebody pre-teens. All kids are addicted to phones or gadgets, and parents परेशान हैं कि कैसे करें. There are clients of mine जिनकी mothers हैं, and in fact there is a client of mine who's 65 years old, addicted to the phone. Her kids have been calling me कि हम क्या करें, मम्मी phone नहीं छोड़ती. And the kids are complaining that she doesn't have time for us. We are trying to talk to her about something and she is busy with her phone. And now this becomes a very the phrase that you've used here is very good, pati, patni and phone. Because actually the phone has become the third person in the relationship. And it could be either of the two people. It's not just that the man is on the phone and that's why, the man is cheating. It could be the woman who's cheating, or it could be the both of them. So this is like a next level thing. We are now beginning to categorize this as an addiction. So we are now looking at this as an addiction. Not just, it could have been pati patni and alcohol. It could have been pati patni and heroin, or pati patni and coke. But it's in a similar this thing. But yes, we can be a lot more conscious of this, and we are a lot more in control of it actually, if you go to see. So these days we specifically work on this aspect when we're working with couples, that how is it that we can just attend to each other minus the phone. So we are establishing rules. Like I said, a lot of the couple work is just skill building and setting systems in place. So one of the systems that we put into place is about what are the phone free times. So for instance, we established that meals wale time pe phone nahi rahega. When we are, and this couple that I'm working with currently, for instance, they have decided that we're going to spend 40 minutes together with each other every other day, just sitting and talking, maybe about household things, maybe about each other. And it is such a big success that I can't tell you. And so the rule is that we cannot have our phones at that time. So the phones are out 40 minutes on the timetable. They're sitting with each other, which is incredible if you ask me. And believe me, Sanjay, most of the things that they had come to me with are already gone. The conflicts are already out of the window because both of them are feeling very nice about it.
Good, great. So it's a great thing. Once you recognize that yes, pati patni and phone is the big trouble these days. No, not just pati, but also with kids and parents, everybody.
Oh,
so it is a big addiction. Yes. Now, men and women have got some inherent differences, the way they think, the way they express, the way they relate to things. Physiologically, physically, hormonally. So men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Typically, as I said. How important is it for both of them to know these differences and accept these differences?
I think 100%. It is that important. It is one of the most important things in the relationship. To just be very cognizant of the fact that I'm a different person, you are a different person. We are wired to be different. So, and the more we recognize these differences, we realize that it becomes so easy to deal with the other person and to deal with our differences then it becomes like this, then it doesn't remain like a big mystery ki, oh, itna badi problem aa gayi, kaise deal karenge and all that. Because, for instance, one of the things that I see a lot of men struggling with is that my wife is too emotional and I don't know how to handle it. And or she gets mad at me for things that मुझे समझ में भी नहीं आता कि मेरी गलती क्या है और यहाँ पे गुस्सा चले जा रहा है. And so on. So whether it's the emotionality, and then a lot of women say that, I'm talking to this guy and he behaves like I'm not even there. That I talk to him और वो अखबार सामने कर देते हैं या वो phone पे लग जाते हैं and things like that. So like that. So it's important to understand how each of us functions, regardless of whether it's a man or a woman. Yes, basic man-woman differences भी पता हो तो अच्छा रहता है. But and in fact, this is one of the things that we do when we are working with couples, is to just understand how this individual functions. Let's just understand. So, for instance, if you are talking to the husband, what is going on in the husband's mind when he is this is called stonewalling, by the way. That one person is talking to you and you're busy with your phone, you're just behaving in a non-responsive sort of a way. It's called stonewalling. So what is happening with the husband when he's stonewalling? So the husband then speaks a lot of times, himmat karke, and then they say, ki, I'm really shitting in my pants at that time because I don't know what to say. और मुझे नहीं पता कि अब next कौन सा मेरे ऊपर बॉम्ब आने वाला है. So I'm so clueless and I'm so tired of the whole thing ki, no matter what I do, she's not going to be happy with me. So it's important to see that the husband is doing this not because he's trying to be mean to you, but because he's perhaps helpless and frustrated and doesn't know how to go ahead. And so he's just trying to block you out. Similarly, the wife, when she is asked that, why are you going on haranguing the guy? Why are you going on badgering him with something? And you're annoyed, you're irritated, you're cranky. So one of the things, for instance, very recently, this popped up in one of our sessions. The wife said, oh, I'm really sorry about this, but I was PMSing at that time. And then the husband immediately got up and said, oh, I realize that now. I wish I had remembered that you're PMSing, because usually when I understand that this is what is happening, I automatically calm down a little bit and then I know, chalo theek hai, itni koi badi baat nahi hai. So he had also, it had slipped his mind. But then she also said that, all I need is for the guy to say that, the guy to make me feel that I matter. Right now, the more he stonewalls me, the more I feel that I don't exist for him. And that is what is killing me inside. So it's so important to understand how that person is operating. What are the thoughts and the feelings that are going on in the other person, to be able to then understand ki, a lot of times, we get caught because we feel this is about me. She's angry because of me. He is upset because of me. But there are so many times when people are reacting the way they are reacting because of something that's going on within themselves. It's just coming out in the context of the spouse. It may not have everything to do with the spouse. So I think it becomes very important, Sanjay, like you said, to look at the differences of how a man and a woman are wired and how individually a human being is wired. We also go back into further experiences. What is shaping you to be the kind of person that you are right now? That also becomes a very relevant part of the whole narrative and helps us understand.
So that comes to a very important point, that so what do we do when you hit trouble or hit turbulence in your married life, how to deal with it?
I think the first part is very first step is to acknowledge that there's trouble. A lot of times, Sanjay, we come across people who've spent years in denial and that there's a problem, or that there's a problem in the relationship. They've spent years thinking that problem lies with the other person, and so उनको वो कर ले जो कर ले, मैं तो सब ठीक कर रहा हूँ या कर रही हूँ. So the first step is to acknowledge that there is a problem and to see the problem as a problem of the relationship, not of the partner. Okay, there are times when one person is more problematic and is contributing to more of the problems, that's fine. But I'm saying, just as when people come to us for couple work, we treat the relationship as a unit. We don't see the two people who have come to us as individual clients. The relationship is the client. And so also, I think if two people in a relationship can see that. So first step is acknowledging that there is a problem. Second step is to communicate, to talk about it. A lot of times we find it difficult to talk because obviously we are also looking at some kind of a precedent. Maybe talking was attempted, it never happened, it wasn't successful. So in situations like these, what we need to do is perhaps sit down and make a list for ourselves. Let me see what is the problem. Before I even bring it up with my partner, do I know what is going on? And writing is a very, very useful tool there. So, and in fact, it's done very commonly in therapy, because when two people come and there's a mix up generally, ki problem hi kya chal rahi hai, nahi pata. So we tell them to, just take out time, sit and write. What do you think is the problem? So a lot of times people say this one is like that one is like that, and inhone ye kar diya, unhone wo kar diya. And we say that when you're looking at the problem in the relationship that is happening, you look at things that are happening from the other person's side and things that are happening from my side. Things that I possibly feel my partner needs to change, things that I feel I may need to modify in order to make the relationship slightly better. And then the third step is to communicate. If things really don't happen well that way also, then I would say you reach out for help. You go to a professional and you talk it out.
So you said about communication. This is very, very important to communicate to your partner. And I would say that's also, you highlighted that it's important to communicate with yourself. You need to know yourself that where things are wrong with you. And to be objective about that communication, I think it helps to write it down on a piece of paper. Because when you write it down, you're more objective about things. Do you think silent acceptance and adaptation also has a role to play in repairing a relationship?
Yes, I do feel so. I do feel that has a role to play. And in fact, a lot of times it is the only course of action to be taken. When, let's say, the partner is such who does not have insight into himself or has a difficult personality, and you don't really see too much room for change and so on. So silent acceptance and adaptation and working on your part of the whole deal. Because see, a relationship is about 50-50, right? So we may not have control over the partner's 50%, but we do have control over my 50%. So I can certainly sit down and figure out what is it that I can do at my end, which will largely have to do with, okay, are there things that, one thing that we talk about a whole lot in these kind of difficult, I would say this is more a strategy in terms of difficult relationships, where a lot of times these relationships are not even brought to therapy because one partner refuses to come or something like that. And so one of the things that we talk about in this regard is what is it that I can do within myself. So it has to do a lot about my emotions. So what are my emotions playing out in the context of my spouse and how can I handle those? And a lot of times we talk about something that I call a glass wall. So that you have to build a glass wall between you and your partner. But this is, Sanjay, this I'm talking about a slightly more extreme situation where we're dealing with an abusive partner or things like that. And that you need to, for whatever reason, you have to continue in the relationship. There we talk about building a glass wall around us so that we don't feel emotionally affected all the time, emotionally affected or assaulted rather all the time. And we're able to function despite the difficult partner. But this tremendous role of contemplation, introspection, looking at your part of it, a lot of times silently accepting things and adapting to things, which I feel has to happen regardless of what is happening in the couple therapy front. While two people work with each other, work will always be incomplete if an individual is not doing the part that you are talking about.
So yes, because communication is that we all get to hear a lot about, but it is also seen that when you try to communicate, the couples end up arguing with each other. It degenerates into a fight.
Yes.
That's not really a kind of communication that is being talked about. So I think by what you mean by communication is a healthy, positive, constructive communication, but with the end point. Okay, fine. At this point, you should stop also.
See, I think this communication is a very big part of the work that is done with couples largely. And in that, like I said, Sanjay, there's a lot of skill building. One of the things that I find most effective in that entire list of things is focusing on the emotion in terms of communication. Because a lot of communication, it is not really about the context, about, the story, the situation. It is not really about that. Two people are largely fighting because they're upset at the emotional level. So for instance, I feel disrespected by you, maybe a theme, and now we are fighting about why did you talk to my friend like that and why did you speak to my parents like that and da 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 da. But the core might be that I need you to respect me. And so it becomes very important for the spouse to catch what is the underlying emotion and focus on that, because otherwise it just becomes a volley, it becomes a match. I said this because that one said this, and then you also spoke to that one like that, and you also insulted me in front of this person. So it can become a match. If communication becomes about, the situation, the circumstance, the mudda, so to say, it usually snowballs into something else and leads to some random subject. It becomes very important to diffuse it. The way to diffuse that and the way to really focus our communication is to pick up the emotion and reflect it back.
So what you mean to say is that you should try to identify the underlying need which is there, or the underlying reason which is there, and not go by the pattern which is emerging out of it, and actually try to eliminate the pattern and address the need.
Absolutely. It would in fact be very useful to identify the pattern and maybe put it out on the table, that dear, this is what we are doing. See, you are saying this, and now I'm going to say this, and this is how we typically fight. It's very useful, it's very healthy to bring it out and put it on the table and say, okay, we are in a loop. Do you think you and I can do something different to break it? And so in this kind of a volley that's going on, if one person can say, I realize, I can see that you're feeling hurt, and I'm sorry, that wasn't my intention. Just this, and you know that you've broken the loop. There's still more work to be done, but you diffuse it and you bring the communication down to a much more relevant level.
So, but what if things don't really work out? Things continue to be worse. So, what are the signs, times, or situations where one should call it a quit? If at all, one should call it a quit.
Uh, that's a tough one, Sanjay. I mean, for us, you know, a lot of times we feel um, there are markers, especially in very abusive kind of relationships, uh, where one feels that, you know, this may lead to harm and to this person or somebody else. Those are situations, obviously, those are like no brainers. But you'll be surprised. Actually, you may not be surprised, because I think we see it all the time around us, that people choose to continue in those relationships as well, which is a very personal choice, and we need to respect that. But I think it becomes a very personal parameter, that have I tried enough? Have I tried to make the relationship work? And is it working or not working? If there is even a minor shift in the right direction, I would say give it a greater shot. But it's for the person to choose that, you know, when things are really not working, if your needs are just not being met in the relationship, if your partner is just not understanding you despite your attempts, and you find it impossible to live in this situation, I think that is where one can perhaps look at calling it quits. But Sanjay, having said that, I think it is such a subjective thing, because you give me the same situation and there'll be four people who will have very, very divergent things that they want to do in that situation. And and you know, for instance, a person who's inherently, one of the things that you, for instance, that we are seeing in the current generation is, you know, this sense of entitlement. We all feel very entitled to pursue our desires. We feel entitled to fulfill our wishes. And the key word here is entitlement. It's nice. It's a nice thing. If I have a wish, if I have a desire, it's a nice idea to pursue it. By all means, we need to pursue it. It's the entitlement which is perhaps a problematic thing. Because when we feel entitled, then calling it quits becomes like this. That becomes like option one. That I mean, there are people who are entering marriage with the idea of divorce in their head. That agar aise aise nahi hua to theek hai. You know, so I think there needs to work on that aspect. So as a culture, we are still much better off right now, because we are all conditioned to treat the couple unit as a family. We are all very family oriented people. So utna divorce ka cheez immediately aata nahi hai. But I see it more in the younger generation. I see it more in people who are living outside of the country. Indians, I'm talking about Indian people who are living outside of the country. And because the environment also that they're living in is very, very pro-divorce. In fact, there's a classical case of this friend of mine who got into this whole 7-year pruritus NI, and then decided after some time that, you know, I think I should call it quits. And I said, why? I mean, the guy that you're married to is really nice. Why would you want to do this? And so on. She said, no, I think it's a decent idea, and all my friends are supporting it. All my friends are, in fact, after my life, that why aren't you leaving this guy? So, you know, a lot of times people come to us after, you know, there's infidelity in a relationship, for instance, that you know, now should I just we should part ways because this person has cheated on me. And but even then, the person concerned, the person who's feeling like the victim in the relationship, a lot of times they say that, you know, I want to give it a try, I want to make it work with this person, but there's so much pressure on me, I feel I'm just letting everybody down, because now there's a whole lot of shame attached with staying put rather than leaving. You know, earlier there was a lot of shame attached to leaving and or calling it quits, like you're saying. But now there's greater shame attached to, oh, you don't have self-respect and women's rights and da 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 da, all of that. Why aren't you leaving? Why are you staying with this guy who's a cheat? And so on. So, you know, उस तरीके का mindset एक बनता जा रहा है, unfortunately. which is not even allowing people to really stick to their own thought process and decide for themselves what is it that I really want to do in this situation. So, in our culture, I feel people still don't really want to call it quits as option number one. But wherever this whole entitlement business is creeping in, there people are quicker to take that as an option.
So because it's happening more often, that's the reason the question came up. But now, people who have that thing in their mind, or considering that as an option, so what do you think is life for them on the other side? So people who actually quit, how life treats them, what do they experience, both the males and the females? They should need to know that as well now.
I don't think it's easy for anybody. I don't think the decision is easy for anybody. And I don't think living up to that decision is easy for anybody. It's very, very difficult. Because, when we're quitting on a marriage, we're not quitting on the partner. We're not just quitting on the partner. We're quitting on an entire life setup. We're quitting on the entire system, especially when there are kids and parents and all these other aspects involved. There is so much that you have now changed in your life that it takes a long time for a person to just adapt to that. And there are so many people who at times just sit and wonder कि मैंने गलती तो नहीं कर दी. So arriving at the decision is not easy for anybody. Living up to the decision is not easy for anybody. There are just way too many factors that one needs to adapt to at a financial level, because as a husband and wife, you have shared finances, things, taxes, bills, who's paying what, fees kaun de raha hai. There are so many things that are already in a system. Now, what you have to look at is, in terms of a divorce, is that you suddenly crash the whole system. और अब नया system शुरू करना है. So starting from where you're going to live, your finances, how are you sharing the common resources now? For instance, when there are kids involved particularly, what are you doing about them? Your friend circle, what are you doing about them? How awkward are you feeling with each other? Do you have some kind of fine tuning still? Do you want to still continue meeting, not meeting? So couples who are able to fine tune these aspects, for instance, they make quite a success of it still. But there are people who live with a lot of animosity, who continue to live with a lot of hostility and so on. Unfortunately, their things don't really work out so well. But it is possible to live a slightly harmonious existence even after a divorce, especially where kids are concerned. Because a lot of people in their decision about divorce, one of the primary concerns is what happens to the kids and how do we tell them, and what happens to their mental health and so on. So if the two people can actually work through this aspect and figure out what are we saying jointly as a team, then even the kids are able to handle the decision far, far better.
So are kids the complication of marriage, or the real binding force of marriage?
I knew you would come to this now. So I don't think they're complications. I think, and I don't want to think that they are the binding force. Binding force ideally should be just the two people amongst themselves. Kids obviously do create a lot of binding. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's like your common creation. How can it not bind you? So they are a binding force. They become a complication when we get into a lot of tu meme. When we get into this whole thing of you were supposed to take care of this part, I'm not going to handle this. And so when there is not a very clear division of sharing of responsibilities, let's say, or when we don't really act as a united front, when we don't act as a team in parenting, that is when children can become complications. And obviously there could be personality related aspects of the child that can create a lot of complication. But largely, I wouldn't say that children are complications. If children are being complications, it's a very, very major, warning sign for us to look within ourselves and see, as a team, where are we going wrong?
The next question is, if suppose, should one commit the same mistake twice? I mean, somebody is married, divorced, then should the person think of remarriage, or should person think of living, as a single person after that? For males or females separately?
By all means, get remarried if that is what you want to do. It's a subjective decision. And a lot of people do decide to go ahead and get remarried and make a success out of it. ऐसा किसी किताब में नहीं लिखा कि अगर एक बार गलती होगी तो अगली बार सक्सेस नहीं होगा. A lot of people actually learn well from it, go on, get married a second time, are fortunate enough to find nice partners and make a good success out of it. But if we want to just mindlessly, blunder ourselves into one thing after the other, then anyway nothing will work. So I think for me, the decision is not so much should I get married or not, should I get remarried or not. The decision is, should I be mindful or not? If I'm mindful of what really happened with me in this relationship, how am I now? And I want to take chances again in future. Because see, being single again is not easy, Sanjay. Especially for somebody who's already led, a family life, lived in a family unit and so on and so forth. Being single may seem very glorious and fancy, but it's not a very easy existence. And I think we all are social beings. We need a sense of belonging. We need family support. And family could be anything. It could be a village that we are living in. It could be a community of friends or something that we're living in. So we have our own definitions of family, but largely we need a family. So I think, especially as we grow older, we want companionship, we need people, and we want greater stability. वो किसी के साथ ज़्यादा आ जाएगी. Unless आप किसी spiritual path पे हैं and you want to spend your time devoted to those things and you want to be on your own, that's a very different matter. But otherwise, by all means, get married. But mindfully so.
Towards the end of the movies and novels, you often come across this phrase, happily, and they happily lived thereafter. Is that a reality or a mirage?
देखिए, as a statement तो वो बिल्कुल ही misleading चीज है. Because it is put across so simplistically that one just goes, it's like, reading, girls grow up reading MBs, Mills and Boons, and thinking कि ऐसे ही होती है life. It's misleading. So while I'm not saying it's not possible, it is very much possible. But उसमें they lived happily ever after, working upon themselves should be, a rider. That अगर आप काम करते रहेंगे, अगर आप फाइन ट्यून करते रहेंगे, तो absolutely by all means you'll live happily ever after with minor bumps and so on, but not magically.
So I have summarized, some points, which I've taken from various places and also which have emerged in today's talk as well. Let me just go through them, and then we'll conclude the session after that. So what are the causes of divorce? The commonest causes. So there's a study done abroad which listed 11 causes in order of priority. So the first cause they said is a lack of commitment to the relationship. That a relationship requires both the partners to continue to work towards it in building its growth and everything. The moment that commitment is lacking, that's where the trouble arises. Second cause is infidelity and extramarital affair. Third is too much of conflict and arguing. So don't argue too much. The argument and conflict itself can lead to divorce. Getting married too young, financial problems, substance abuse, domestic violence, health problems, lack of support from family, little or no premarital education, and religious differences. So these are the common causes, as per studies done abroad, this is the source of this study. In Indian literature, there is no scientific material available to talk about these things. Wherever I went looking for causes and all, they're more of individualized biases which were expressed. So there's no real scientific studies available. What are the early red flags in a bad marriage? Addiction or drug abuse, emotional and/or physical abuse, fear of conflict, inability to have fun together, lack of respect for each other, lack of romance and intimacy. Married too young or for wrong reasons. So this is an important thing that people always marry for wrong reasons too. Overcommitment of time to other things, overspending, selfishness, sexual problems, too much dependence on parents, and unrealistic expectations. So these are the early red flag signs which may mean trouble, and one needs to identify and address them. So what are the ways to save a marriage? They say commit to the relationship. The thought of divorce, separation, or living single should not occur to you. It should not come as an option, because the moment it comes as an option, you automatically start building on that. So they say, do not think about quitting. Always commit to your relationship. A relationship requires constant, ongoing, lifelong effort from both the partners. The moment any one partner stops working on it, it leads to trouble. Honor and respect your partner. Communicate regularly. Share financial expectations. Give each other space. Work on your wellness. Have date nights. Forgive quickly. Don't try to control your partner. And if these things are not working out, then you should find help, as was told by Purnima also. So, Purnima, what is the final take-home message that you have for the audience for today?
I think the final few things, let's say, that we want everybody to remain mindful of is, the first thing is to be mindful of the relationship, of how I am in a relationship and how my partner is in the relationship. And to know that this is going to be work in progress. The moment we leave aside or we drop that thought from our head, I think we become complacent and we take things for granted, and that is automatically going to lead to problems. If we are mindful of the fact that this is going to be work in progress, I have to do my bit. Just take responsibility for your bit. Forget about what your partner is doing. It's nice to nudge the partner also every once in a while, but largely take responsibility of just your 50% of this relationship and do the best of what you can. Communicate. Communication has to be the key of fine-tuning everything. The things that you've listed out over here, Sanjay, they are very, very relevant things, and majority of them, I mean, I'm going to rule out substance abuse because it's a very different aspect altogether, but all the other things that you've talked about in that list of problems are very workable. They're very workable, and those are the kind of things that we're largely doing with a lot of couples. So also the mindset that I think largely we are all blessed with, thanks to being in this culture, is that we treat the marriage as a family. You don't divorce your family. So we are automatically more committed to it per force. By default, I think we are more committed to it. So if the sense of entitlement is sort of creeping in, we want to just check that a little bit and address our desires, our needs, our wishes, our wants in a more healthy way, in a more pragmatic way, without jeopardizing the relationship.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, there are a few questions. Yeah. So there is a very likelihood of some differences creeping in when two people interact. The question is it always right to have no opinions of your own just to keep peace at home?
Not a good idea. Not a good idea. See, because peace buying is a very short-term thing. There are a lot of people, I mean, a lot of us are very, what we call the placaters by nature. We try to buy peace at whatever cost, to chup reh jao, apna muh band rakh lo, overlook kar lo. But it's not a sustainable model. For some time, yes, it's nice. It's a useful quality, but it cannot be done as on a lifelong basis. So while we buy peace on one side, we also need to constantly look at ways of bringing those things up and addressing them in a healthy way. If you're not able to speak about it, a lot of times writing a letter is a great idea. Maybe just write a letter, don't give it to your partner, read it to yourself and see, can I now speak it out? If you still can't speak it out, then maybe hand over the letter.
The other thing is that you mentioned the present generation and their sense of entitlement. So there is a question, is the institution of marriage likely to stay? Children nowadays have a completely different view on a lot of things, including marriage. Marriage is just a legality for them. They're very happy with a live-in relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have the answer to that really. Ki marriage rahegi few years from now ya nahi rahegi as an institution. But I agree with what this person is saying, that clearly the younger generation, for instance, now is, in fact, a lot of parents, when they're talking to their kids these days, are saying that, I mean, if you decide to get married, then da. Whereas when our parents used to talk to us, they would be like, jab tumhari shaadi ho jayegi, tab aise aise karna. Now there is an if. So we know that there is a shift on that front. A lot of people are in favor of living in and are very comfortable with that. A lot of people, in fact, are not very comfortable after having lived in for a while because they want more. So going back to the two needs that we were talking about, we are wired to look for stability. We are wired to look for certainty and so on. A live-in cannot give that to us. And if you are so committed and so happy living with each other, then where is the problem in just signing the papers?
So that's the next question. Where is the need to marry if one has to be ultimately self-sufficient only? Why is the commitment needed? Just live alone.
See, I think that gets answered if we look at it. If we ask ourselves, why is it that we want to get married, or what is it that we're seeking from the other person? So if if you're just on your own and you want to be self-sufficient in every which way, which means financially, socially, emotionally, and so on, maybe even sexually, to alag kahani hai. But you need another person, maybe to satisfy your sexual needs, maybe to satisfy your emotional needs, maybe to satisfy a certain need for belonging and maybe socially also. So if there are those needs, then we need a person. Then comes the question, ठीक है तो वो person मिल गया, now why get married to that person? I think that becomes a very individual thing, and the need to get married comes from this thing that we want to do it in a slightly structured way, and we want to do it in a slightly established, secure sort of a way. So yeah.
Any more questions, Nati?
Yeah. There are a couple of more questions if we have the time.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so if the sum of parts is greater than the whole, then why should there be expectation reduction? I mean, how should you calibrate your expectations? And, when is the time to decide that you need to down-regulate?
Down-regulate as in reduce your expectations?
Yeah.
I think we already have a preset meter for that. We already have a preset alarm for that. It happens automatically, no? I have an expectation, you don't fulfill it for me. I know, acha kuch gadbad hogi. I will feel upset, right? Now that upset is the beginning. The beginning of, do I want to further ask my partner for fulfilling that need, or do I want to calibrate it within myself कि मैं अपनी ये need को थोड़ा adjust कर लूँ? And it has to strike a fine balance there. So there'll be no formula to this. There will be no formula to this because it will be a subjective matter for each person. The moment you find that your expectation, your need is not being met in your relationship, the first thing is that we try and get it met in the relationship, because that's what we are here for, right? And we want to ideally be alive in the relationship, because if everything we are just taking within ourselves and adapting and adjusting, then we are not in a relationship really. It's not a live relationship. But if after repeated attempts, it's not really happening, perhaps we want to now regulate it. Or let's say my partner's given me a feedback that, this is too much. I don't think I can do this. For instance, one person had the need that I should visit my parents. The woman had this need that I should visit my parents every weekend. The husband said, okay, I'm willing to play along, but not every weekend, because weekend is my time. I need my downtime. So there, obviously, the woman will need to regulate her expectation a little bit. Ki chalo, theek hai, every other weekend hum chale jayenge, or some such thing, So that's that.
Any tips for young childless couple with a philandering husband?
Lots of tips, lots of work to be done. So again, this whole philandering business is like material for 2-3 separate talks, if you ask me, because there's so much more. I mean, it just changes the complete dynamic, right? So far, we're really talking about couples per se, and we are assuming that both the people want to be in the relationship. Now, when a philandering person enters into the equation, then that itself becomes a question mark. Does the person really want to be in the relationship?
And also, Purnima, it qualifies childless young couple with a philandering husband.
Absolutely.
So there are 3 riders here.
Absolutely. And so also, which is why this becomes a big question mark, because bacha bhi nahi hai, there are no anchors as such. There are no binding factors, so to say. And young hai, so that whole entitlement business also is more prevalent here, where a person feels ki chalo theek hai na, I mean, I have the right to live my life and I have the right to do my own thing and so on. And in which case, you know, one really needs to ask the wife, what is it that you want? Are you okay with this? If you are, very well. If you're not, do you want to continue being in the relationship or do you want out? And so on. One also needs to get into the mind of the philanderer, that if you want the free wild life, then why not step out and just be on your own? Why are you in the marriage? And if you are in the marriage and you want to continue in the marriage, then can we lay down certain rules? Can we perhaps make an attempt towards achieving some kind of sanctity?
Okay. And there's another one which says that mutual respect, honesty, empathy, companionship, the usual blah blah, enables you to see the ups and downs of the relationship. And this is a given. So how reasonable is it then to take your anger out on the other? If you feel angry, why take it out on your companion?
Yeah, ideally that shouldn't be the case. I mean, I'm with the person, whoever is asking this question. Ideally, the anger should not come out on somebody else. And it applies to every relationship, not just a couple relationship. But yeah, we very often use the partner as a punching bag. And the person who is treating the partner as a punching bag needs to be made aware that, boss, I'm not your punching bag. So the person who has become the punching bag inadvertently needs to point this out to the partner. That, boss, I'm your wife or I'm your husband. I'm not the punching bag. So, you know, when we are at the receiving end of the anger, it becomes my responsibility also to draw a line. Because if I'm just sitting there and absorbing what is being served to me, then I'm in a way encouraging or enabling that behavior.
Yeah.
So it becomes my responsibility that way, while the other person needs to obviously look at his anger and see better ways of expressing it. I feel that the person who's at the receiving end also has a responsibility. And Nidhi, I feel that one very, very big thing in this whole couple business, and even otherwise, I think in all my work that I do, is to have some kind of checks within ourselves that, am I turning myself into a victim? Am I feeling like a victim? Because that, believe me, is one of the most terrible things that we can do to ourselves. We make ourselves very, very helpless and fragile if we allow ourselves to be a victim. Somebody is being a perpetrator. The partner is a perpetrator when he's throwing his anger at me. But I choose to not be a victim and I draw a line.
Yeah. So also the relationship bombs, the big ones, infidelity, money, sex, all these are the big ones. Or as you mentioned, some cultural mismatches, you know. And these get addressed rather easily, even if to a negative conclusion. They get addressed rather easily because they're so visible. But there are some small, subtle things that bomb a relationship. So, you know, the partner values his independence or her independence over the relationship. The partner has friends that you just can't sit with. The partner does not share their problems with you. They're an island on their own. So these are the subtle bombs which don't get addressed. Is there a way to bring these up in a friendly and logical manner?
See, I think, Nidhi, as you talk about them, they also sound like things that people will very naturally be defensive about.
Yeah, exactly. You know, but they're very subtle behaviors. I mean, you know, you're just accepting them or not accepting them.
Yeah. So when a person is defensive about a certain aspect, it does become tricky to bring it up. Because you know that the moment you bring it up, the person is going to go on the defensive or is going to attack you, and it's going to get, sidetracked into some other fight. So it will be tricky to bring up these things. And yet I think these are very, very important things to be brought up. And a lot of times, like I said, it may not be very easy to talk about these things. And one of the biggest reasons why we don't talk about things is because we fear a certain reaction from our partner. And it's a very valid, it's a very understandable thing, but somewhere we want to find ways of going around it. So one of the things that can be done is, obviously, first is to attempt talking. If that does not happen, then writing. If that does not happen, then get a third party, not a partner. So get a third party involved. It could be somebody, a common friend, it could be a mediator, or it could be a professional.
Or a parent.
Or a
sometimes,
parent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because in the Indian family setup, the parents used to form this cushion, creating that safe space, which presently is a little dwindling.
It is dwindling, but also वो बेचारे भी पिस जाते हैं after a certain point, which will happen to the third party anyway. And I mean, that's a risk that the third party will face. But yeah, so involving it needs to be brought up, because see, otherwise it's a block in the relationship. Otherwise, this is typically one of those things जिसके ऊपर फिर हम बैठे रहेंगे, and then after several years we find ourselves that we've really drifted apart and we are not interested in each other anymore.
Yeah. So interestingly, there was something that I read somewhere, and this is not in the questions, but sort of a corollary that related any relationship, but particularly marriage and companionship, to jumping 3 fences. The first is the lowest, which is, of course, you require least energy, just require a little bit of momentum, but it carries you through. That is when you're attracted and you have high energy and it's young, and you jump over that fence quite easily and into the relationship. The second is shared activities, where it's still easy. There might be some activities that you don't share. This fence is a little higher, and you might try to create ability and capacity to share each other's activities, but you manage if the momentum is high enough. But it's the final fence that really gets the people down, and that's the fence of values. It's, so it's whether you value, say, religion over atheism, or truth over empathy, or those kind of,
and even very basic things, Nidhi. I mean, what you brought up is a very, very crucial part of a couple relationship, and we talk about it in the context of shared meaning.
Yeah.
And a couple that has shared meaning between them has a much, much higher probability of making it smooth and long and sustained relationship, as against people who do not have a shared meaning. So the shared meaning can be in terms of money, that we should have this much money. There may be a partner who feels कि बहुत सारा पैसा होना चाहिए, and there may be a partner who feels कि यार जितनी ज़रूरत है उतना होना चाहिए. So there's a bit of a conflict there. There may be partners there may be a person who feels that parents के साथ रहना चाहिए. There may be others who feel कि नहीं यार independently रहना चाहिए, parents के साथ इतनी जिंदगी तो रह ली है, अलग रहो अब. And so again, conflict. There may be people who feel children should, very small little things, day-to-day things, children should study in boarding schools. Another person feels no, children should be in day schools. And so there is room for conflict everywhere there. And wherever we are able to create a shared meaning, a combined shared value, for instance, the probability of a harmonious relationship goes up several notches. And these are workable things. It's not necessary. For instance, money matters. We actually sit people down and talk about money. What are your thoughts about money? Where are they coming from? Because see, everything has a history. Our early experiences are shaping us. So I have a certain idea about money because of the way I have lived in my parental home. Maybe I didn't see too much money and now I feel कि इतना होना चाहिए या बहुत सारा होना चाहिए. And maybe I've lived in comfort and all my needs were met, and I feel that one should just continue like this. Jitna zarurat hai, utna lo. So when we see the context that we are coming from, it makes it much more easy to understand the other person's value system. So a lot of times, even when we cannot match the value system, it helps a lot to understand the other person's value system and come to terms with that and be okay with it. Because there are bound to be differences.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we just
So
agree to disagree on certain matters.
yeah, so that's what this interesting piece said, that, you know, if you start with the third fence, where you don't have to align with the values, you just have to understand them and accept them, then jumping the other two fences in the reverse order becomes easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Then there is no trouble
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Those are simple fences anyway.
Yeah. So over to Sanjay then.
So thank you very much, Purnima, for coming on the show and giving us so much of information about this very, very important subject. You know, and
Thank you so much, Sanjay, for having me here. It has been very, very interesting.
we overshot the time, but I think the subject required more time. So
Oh yes, when you sent me that list of questions, I knew that there is no way that we are doing this in 40 minutes or an hour.
But thanks for your cooperation and for staying on that much longer. I'm sorry we lost Sanjay Chok because of his network issues and all. And now towards the end of this conversation, we came up with some important points. Like there's a reference to intimacy and sexuality and sex. You know. So the next week we'll be taking up this another very important issue, that is sex, the different aspects about sexuality, the changing scenario, and we're calling it different strokes for different folks. So please do join us next week. That is 30th of August, Sunday at 11:30 a.m. on the live chat with another set of very good speakers. We'll be discussing about sex and sexuality. Thank you very much for joining us. Be part of our group that is the live chat on Facebook, where we are really a buzzing community and discussing about various aspects of life. Take part in that. Once again, thank you very much. Bye-bye. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye.